It's a fact that doctors and nurses are going to see some pretty nasty things in their professional lives. Sometimes, however, what they witnessed isn't just gruesome, rather it's totally spooky. Take these 20 memories, for example, which are definitely in the realm of the unexplained. In 2002, a doctor working with paraplegic and tetraplegic patients revealed that 4 of his patients had complained of dreaming about falling from their beds. Apparently, each of the patients, who were in different rooms, had awoke to find their legs hanging outside their mattresses. The explanation? According to nurses, a ghostly figure was often seen moving in and out of the ward's rooms. Also in 2002, a hospitalized grandmother who was on morphine was reportedly going in and out of consciousness. 8 hours before the elderly lady died, Redditor Oceanic Whitetip explained, "She started crying and whimpering like she was afraid of something. At one point, the grandmother grabbed her daughter's arm and apparently whispered, 'There is a place for bad little boys and girls.'" Redditor Welsh Hero Beans, a one-time hospital IT help desk worker, apparently reported to his boss that every night he heard windows and doors banging. The man's office, stationed 2 floors above an old mortuary, was believed to be a former nun's dormitory. However, his boss reportedly told him that he was the only living thing in the building during his 6 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift. Student nurse and Redditor Amnistria 1 used to work in a nursing home. One time, a patient of hers suddenly held her face and said, "There's a woman in the doorway. She's very angry at both of us. Please be careful." Therefore, Amnistria 1 asked her frightened patient to describe the woman. The patient replied, "She's green and black and gray. She's very angry and she's waiting for me. Death is coming. It's coming quickly." One anonymous freaked out Redditor was once assigned to the Alzheimer's ward at a nursing unit. A patient there, they said, had been complaining about a strange man paying her nighttime visits. "He's real handsome," the patient apparently said. "Oh, he's right behind you now, honey." Then the Redditor felt a hand on their shoulder and the patient passed away the following night. Student nurse and Redditor Jess Panda Pants once cared for an elderly lady with final stage kidney failure. As the pair were talking, the lady looked past the nurse and said, "Bill's here, love, I've got to go." Afterward, the lady stopped breathing and quietly passed away. It was later discovered that Bill was the name of her late husband. Redditor Running Moon, a nurse, was once chatting with a mentally ill lady who claimed to see people crawling across the hospital floor. Why? Well, to touch the legs and toes of those not already tucked up, of course. To the nurse's horror, the lady began telling her in detail about the person who'd been touching Running Moon's own feet as they'd been talking. One time, student nurse and Redditor Simple Simon 6262 asked to help a team treating a female stroke patient who sadly died after 45 minutes of CPR. After her passing, the woman's body was cleaned and her family were called in to say their farewells. But then, strangely, the woman rose and asked to see her relatives before dying all over again. A 94-year-old great-grandmother with dementia, according to Redditor Smelly Cheese Feet, explained to visiting nurses that a small boy in the corner of her lounge was taunting her. The boy said, apparently, that her demise was near. But because of the elderly lady's condition, her claims were dismissed. However, when a visitor later brought along their 3-year-old son, he pointed to the corner in question and screamed, "I'm going to beat you up." Redditor Whoa 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 there, a psychiatric registered nurse, once tried to comfort a hysterical 7-year-old boy who claimed that an old man in a hospital gown had visited him. While describing the man, the child apparently said, "Oh my God, he's right behind you." The man left shortly afterward, but less than 3 minutes later, another screaming boy down the hall reportedly saw him. A nurse, Redditor Mama Brains, was starting a night shift when she was told that one of the patients had suddenly died. The new occupant of the deceased's room also died later that night, but they later came back to life. "I can't be in here," the patient reportedly said. "This man won't stop looking at me." The nurse asked what the man looked like, at which point the patient accurately described the room's previous occupant. In the 1950s, Redditor The Mighty Goat Man's mom worked at Chelsea and Westminster Teaching Hospital in London, UK. Apparently, she once found a faucet running at work. She reported it to the matron, who explained that the ward was supposedly haunted by a ghost that left the faucet on whenever a child was about to die. Sure enough, the following day the nurse was informed that a child had died after suffering a sudden, fatal seizure. One-time emergency medical technician and Redditor Come In Me Bro used to regularly take an older female dialysis patient across town. The patient once mentioned that a man wearing purple scrubs had stroked her hair during her treatment. The Redditor later saw the purple man too. However, at the same time, it turned out the patient was suffering a fatal heart attack. In her own words, Redditor Mrs. Lincoln's husband has the worst luck with hospital roommates. One, in fact, suddenly began throwing up blood, so the husband pressed the emergency button. No one responded, so the husband stayed with the violently ill man. One of the nurses who eventually arrived said, "It's a darn good thing you were out in the hallway waving at us." The husband replied, "I wasn't in the hallway, I stayed with the man." However, the man died shortly afterwards. When Redditor Lady Britzy worked in a hospital, she wrote, "Everyone there knew it was haunted. In fact, her husband, who also worked there, once had to transport a body from the old cancer ward. Apparently, on the way in, all the lights were off. On the way out, however, just 15 minutes later, they were all switched on, as were the TVs behind locked doors." Redditor Lilpin 13, a former U.S. Navy hospital corpsman working at a surgical ward, claimed that one time, call bells used to keep going off at night. This, however, was in spite of the fact that no one was staying in his unit. Plus, sometimes apparently the call button wasn't even connected to the wall. However, Lilpin 13 found that if he spoke to the empty room as if he were addressing a person, the bells would stop. Once upon a time, there was a nurse who'd been tasked with looking after an unconscious, close-to-death patient on an oncology ward. One night, however, the patient reportedly woke up and shouted, "Don't let them take me!" She had apparently spotted a black object above her, and she died just minutes later. A worker at a unit for seriously disabled people once noticed a resident, Larry, strolling along a corridor. Larry apparently would swallow pretty much anything, so it was important to stop him. 10 minutes after his wandering was reported, though, Larry walked out of his bathroom, where he'd been with staff for the last half hour. Larry, it turned out, had a twin who died in the unit a decade previously. At approximately 4 a.m., nurses at the Center for Bone Marrow Transplants reportedly discovered a male patient on the floor. Much of his blood had been spilled, and he died shortly afterward. Later, an old lady apparently asked a nurse if a young guy had died in the same room because the deceased man was talking to her. Creepily, she later suffered a similar accident. She survived, however, and blamed the accident on her predecessor. A nurse whose favorite cat Pippin had just died apparently once entered the room of a female patient on death's door. They'd never met before, but the patient looked at the nurse's feet and said, "Oh, you brought your kitty with you." The shocked nurse asked the patient what color she thought the cat was. "Black with some white," the patient replied, accurately. Strangely, she reportedly died that night.